common experience that lots of students of color and lots of students from marginalized communities experience when they come to university is the kinds of knowledge production that comes from my communities is worthless. And I'm coming here to learn a different way to be smart, a different way to be professional, a different way to preserve knowledge and circulate knowledge. Taking those students back into those spaces where traditional knowledge forms are valued and treasured, there are lots of tears. It happens almost every time. A student who feels very vulnerable and very on the outside in a space like this feels like they are experiencing a homecoming. And to know that this kind of knowledge is valued here makes them feel like they belong.
Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I would love to hear about where you grew up and what growing up was like.
I was born in New York City, Queens, to a Colombian immigrant family. In the 80s, in Queens, there was a Colombian stronghold, more than an enclave even. And when I was a child, it was an all Spanish-speaking, Spanish cultural world. And so my family moved out of the city and out of that Spanish language, Spanish cultural community into a really different world. A world where in Southern California, being Latino was a liability. And it became really apparent immediately that there were political and cultural divisions, and this is something that I experienced early on. And then eventually my family moved from San Diego to New Hampshire, which was an even more stark reality. It was when I came to Philadelphia that I started to recover who I was and the roots that made me someone who was engaged politically, had a political consciousness. As a graduate student, I did a master's program at Temple, and there started to reconnect with the Latino communities here and the cultural work that was happening, cultural recovery work. And then eventually ended up at Penn in a PhD program, and then did environmental history combined with literary studies. And then across the street, and here I am. I've been here for over 6 years now, focused on the intersection of Latinx studies and environmental studies, and trying to engage a lot with the local community here in Philadelphia.
I'm really taken by your experience reacquainting yourself with your heritage and how that led to the community-based learning that you're doing and taking students out into the field. Is that part of it, or is it more of the environmental aspect of things that you're interested in?
As a graduate student at Penn, I was a fellow in the environmental humanities program, and started to talk to people who were from marginalized communities here in Philadelphia about what their concerns were. And a lot of it had to do with access, language access, the ways in which they've been alienated from traditional foodways, but just by virtue of being migrants.
Right.
A lot of people who come to Philadelphia from Mexico or Central America are one generation or less removed from an agricultural life. That kind of disjuncture is something that I had experienced, though it was never a part of the narrative in my family. Like a lot of immigrant families, there is a kind of turning away from the past and a more of looking forward. In Spanish, there's a very common expression, it's siempre pa'lante, always forward, don't look back. And so I felt an echo in myself, talking to people who had come from these communities, and the kinds of things that they missed, the kinds of parts of their identity that they felt had been left behind. A lot of that had to do with food work and food justice work. I developed this course out of the Spanish program. It was in collaboration with Cristina Martinez, who's a restaurateur and food justice organizer here in Philadelphia. She's also an undocumented migrant from central Mexico, and her story is really popular. She had a Chef's Table episode, and she won the James Beard Award. Took students there to this space, and realized that if I allowed myself as the professor, the expert, to just step away and allow the community leader to speak directly to the students and to shape the conversation, that the experience would be transformative. And that was a turning point moment for me. And this was in my first summer teaching here at Drexel. Ever since then, I've been working more and more to try to expand those experiences and bring more and different kinds of students from different disciplines into spaces where they can understand their academic learning through the eyes of the people who are closest to the issues.
How does that affect the students who are involved in that experience? What have you seen as a result of turning it over to the community?
Drexel students, it's no secret, are really pragmatic. Students at Drexel, more than any other place I've ever worked, understand the curriculum and where it's taking them, like how they got in, where they're going, and what they want to do with it. One of the challenges is showing students that part of college is to reshape that sense of where you're going, to amplify your sense of who you can be and your purpose in the world. And so a lot of our work as engaged faculty is to slow students down and give them connections with each other and make space for them to participate in service work in a way that they feel like is connected to their academic development too. They pass through an experience where people are doing hands-on work, learning from community expertise, and they go off in a different direction and start doing more eco-social activist work, much more engaged. A common experience that lots of students of color and lots of students from marginalized communities experience when they come to university is the kinds of knowledge production that comes from my communities is worthless. And I'm coming here to learn a different way to be smart, a different way to be professional, a different way to preserve knowledge and circulate knowledge. Taking those students back into those spaces where traditional knowledge forms are valued and treasured, there are lots of tears. It happens almost every time. A student who feels very vulnerable and very on the outside in a space like this feels like they are experiencing homecoming. And to know that this kind of knowledge is valued here makes them feel like they belong.
One of the things you talked about in addition to that was just the getting over the trepidations or hesitations folks have just personally in that. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's really something that struck a chord with me.
Right. I think a lot of it has to do with the way that we came up in education systems, where if you weren't speaking the language perfectly or writing it perfectly, that was going to be really detrimental to you. And so folks come in with a lot of fear into the language space. Helping students to understand that even in English, we don't speak correctly all the time, and that's natural because we're not robots, can help students feel like it's a process, just like learning anything else. I think it's like a commonplace that you can't actually process or learn languages when you're under duress. And so one of the biggest challenges and the goals in our classes is to lower that stress level and to make students feel like they are included in like a living experience of the language that's not set. They're a part of a much larger, millions and millions of people, large language community, and their learning the language is a contribution to that huge community of language speakers. And so we do a lot of reflection exercises, especially in our advanced classes where students are really struggling to take that next step. And they realize that they're not alone. Yeah. They're together in this project to become global citizens. That's an idea that is, debated, the idea of global citizenship, but it's something that we see in our students. They go abroad, they do a co-op abroad, or they do a study abroad experience, and they come back and they're just different people. Self-assured, they have a broader sense of the human experience and a broader sense of like their own goals. We don't ever teach language in isolation, like out of a textbook. We try to take students either through their learning materials or through experience directly into contact with the spaces in which the language lives. We want students to have an experience within these spaces that they feel like they have access to and that are empowering.
I knew I went to college way too early.
Where was that?
You can still take these classes. They'll give you tuition remission, David.
You're now, I don't know, how many months into being the Associate Dean for DEI here in the college. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory in terms of your interest in the position and the challenges that you see that you want to address, and sort of where you want to go in the next couple of years.
As a young teaching faculty, I didn't spend a lot of time on university committees. I didn't spend a lot of time talking with any big wigs. I just talked with students. And although this was a very narrow porthole into the university experience, I heard a lot about what students were going through and the struggles that they were facing beyond what they were bringing in. struggles that were systemic within not just this institution, right, but within higher education. Right. Part of my goal in applying for this position is to better understand these divisions and to help to start to break them down. As a student of environmental justice, I know we're not going to solve climate change. We're not going to solve any of these issues just in our little silos. We have to work together, and we have to understand both the technical and the human side of this story. I feel like a sense of responsibility as a scholar, as a teacher of environment, to bring people together around these topics.